Introduce our speaker for today, the Reverend Kelly Clement. Kelly is a minister of social justice and welcome at the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. A 2010 MD Divinity graduate of United Theological Seminary in the Twin Cities, Kelly is the former executive director of the Minnesota Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, and she worked as a training consultant for the National Office of RCRC, educating clergy around the country in pastoral care for reproductive decisions and reproductive loss. She's leading the efforts at FUS in the community work of Unrestrict Minnesota and works closely with the legal team as the Society's representative as a plaintiff in the lawsuit to overturn Minnesota's unconstitutional abortion laws.
The Unitarian Universalist Association was gathering resources for conversations and worship resources to talk about reproductive health, rights, justice, and freedom. I wrote this poem to be included in those resources, and I titled it, "Learn to Tell Your Story." My most impactful life decisions in chronological order: to have abortions when I needed them, to get sober, to give birth to our child. If each life is precious, so is mine, so is hers, so is yours. I do not regret nor feel shameful about my abortions. Rather, I am grateful for access to abortion care by compassionate professional providers, and for, as Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison has said, the opportunity to captain my own ship. A wish for all of us, especially my adult child's generation: robust reproductive health, justice, and freedom without stigma or restriction. An end to heteronormative, patriarchal, white supremacy culture. And love and liberation in abundance. May it be so. The last time I visited you was February 20th of 2020, 3 weeks before everything shut down. I don't know what it says that I'm back here as a bookend, right as you're coming back into Sanctuary, and hello to the people on Zoom. I think as we do this from my home congregation at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis, we're one congregation wherever we show up together. You know that we have just passed the 49th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and many of us anticipate that it will be the last, while Roe stands as the law of the land. So it's important that we take some time to grieve the loss of our best tool to determine when and whether to parent, and we must get past the grieving and do the work to understand that something better than Roe must come after the fall of Roe. In movement spaces, reproductive rights activists say that Roe was the floor, not the ceiling. Roe was the floor, not the ceiling. It guaranteed a right, but without access to that right, it rings hollow. It's not enough. Currently, 89% of counties in the U.S. do not have an abortion clinic. Roe was never enough, and I suggest that we have made of Roe v. Wade an idol. We've considered it the last best hope for reproductive rights in the United States. And to be sure, for half a century, Roe has allowed people the idea of planning their lives, the opportunity to captain their own ship. But Roe was the floor, not the ceiling. It never guaranteed access. It didn't stop restriction after restriction, which now puts reproductive justice out of the reach of millions of Americans. As activist Loretta Ross said, "Choice is not worth much to women who have no choices." And of course, Roe didn't stop political fighting and packing of the courts to render it impotent. Activists today, and especially activists in Minnesota, say that we are not just anticipating a post-Roe future. We are here. It is now. It is now. So I want to talk about what happens after the fall of Roe and where we go from here. So this is my life, right? Okay. As Maya Angelou taught us, when you do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better. So I want to start with a new book by gender studies scholar Kyla Schuler, The Trouble with White Women. Well, that yellow and black cover got my attention. Professor Schuler teaches that there have always been two streams of feminism since the beginning of the concept in the 1800s. She contrasts white feminism with intersectional feminism. White feminism upholds systems of entrenched power and demands that white women be given access to the structure that already exists, okay? Intersectional feminism envisions new structures. It centers marginalized voices, that racial justice is tied to reproductive justice. As we sing in our song, intersectional feminism is focused on building a new way. You know how it is when an idea is new with you, you begin to see it everywhere, right? When something opens up for me, I begin to see it everywhere. I am on what I believe to be a lifelong quest to root out the places where white supremacy culture has its hooks in me, right? It can't not. I benefit in a society that is built on white supremacy culture. That doesn't make me a white supremacist. I hope you understand what I mean when I say white supremacy culture. It's got its hooks in me, right? The idea that there's only one right way to do things, the idea that knowing all the answers gets you all the goodies, that sort of thing. This new, to me, idea of white feminism taps a deep root. Pro-choice feminism has been centered in part on the idea of being able to reach the heights of any profession or career without being derailed by an unwanted pregnancy. That's what my decision was certainly about. A profound shift has happened in the last 30 years from a frame of pro-choice to a frame of reproductive justice. And I've spoken about this here to you before. Black women scholars and activists articulated the human rights frame of reproductive justice in the late 1990s. Loretta Ross and others sought to remove the focus from the womb, from the immediate decision of whether or not to continue a pregnancy, from that moment of conception, as how I think my opposition has framed it, from that one moment, to a much more holistic vision. Reproductive justice, a part of intersectional feminism, has a much more holistic vision. It demands the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to nurture the children we have in a safe and healthy environment. More than just a moment of decision, reproductive justice involves the entire lifespan of parent, child, the whole community. It acknowledges the intersection of class, race, and gender. Reproductive justice is racial justice. And when I look for organizations to support, I am looking for those with a reproductive justice lens. Now, we use a lot of words around this work, and some of them can sound a lot the same, but they really have distinct meanings, and I thought I'd unpack that just a little bit. Reproductive health, we may hear about reproductive health. That has to do with what happens in the doctor's offices, right? Anything that's OB/GYN related, right? Contraception, obstetric, birth control, infertility management, pregnancy, et cetera, et cetera. Reproductive rights is what happens at the State House and in the U.S. Capitol and increasingly in the courts, right? In advocacy spaces. Reproductive justice is that frame that I listed before. And so I also do work, you do work in economic justice and climate justice and immigration justice. Any justice lens can be focused also as intersectional with reproductive justice. Here's one piece of language that I also want to lift up and share with you. We've said for years, a woman's right to choose. When women get pregnant, women need health care, centering women. Because we are inclusive people and we want to be inclusive of anyone who gets pregnant, including trans and non-binary individuals, we're talking now more about when people get pregnant. People who need access to health care, a pregnant person. I invite you to shift your own language, if you haven't done so, to talk about pregnant people when a person needs access to abortion care, rather than centering it just on women. We, as Unitarian Universalists, and I know in this congregation as well, you are really working to be fully inclusive, and that's a part of that. And one other piece that leads to stigma is the language of safe, legal, and rare. Many of us of a certain age, that was the language we used to sort of make it okay to talk about abortion. Abortion is okay, but it should be safe, legal, and rare. I tell you that phrase of rare is stigmatizing. It wasn't until this year, some 30 years after my abortions, that I was able to add the S on the end of that word and able to tell my full truth about it. It was okay to have one abortion, maybe. 2 was just stupid. I was just irresponsible and stupid. I say to you that when we include the word of rare, we are making a judgment on who is allowed to get an abortion, who needs it, and how they make decisions about their lives. I encourage you to if you use that language of safe, legal, and rare, I encourage you to replace rare with accessible, safe, legal, and accessible. Safe, legal, and accessible. So let's talk about what's the landscape now. There are 2 significant differences between the 2 major cases. There's a significant difference, and I'm not a lawyer, but lawyers make me smarter. I love to talk to them. Between Roe v. Wade and Casey v. Pennsylvania. Roe said that abortion would be allowed up until fetal viability, right? That was the language, until the fetus could be viable outside the womb. And to be sure, medical advances have moved that viability date back. But the state could not impose rules that would prohibit abortion prior to viability. All right? That's a viability argument. Casey said that states couldn't make laws that would restrict access to abortion if they were an undue burden. And so all the laws that we've seen chipping away and chipping away and chipping away at access were testing that undue burden law. Did you have to wait? Was it an undue burden to wait 24 or 48 or 72 hours after a state-mandated script to get your abortion? Is it an undue burden that doctors who perform abortions must have admitting privileges at hospitals? Is it an undue burden that advanced care practitioners like nurse midwives or physician's assistants and so on can't provide abortion care? What is an undue burden? And those were a test to the Casey law. So what's happening right now is that the Texas law, which you may be aware, says that no abortions after 6 weeks, when most people don't know that they're pregnant. The Supreme Court decided that they were not going to make a decision about that. And actually, that case kind of surprised the court watchers. They went, wait, what? Everybody had their eyes on Mississippi, on Dobbs v. Jackson. And the Mississippi law says no abortions after 15 weeks. That's clearly prior to viability. It's not saying that clinics have to have hallways of a certain width or you have to wait a certain number of days after a script or whatever. It's saying no abortions after 15 weeks, which is a clear affront to viability. And most court watchers believe that they will uphold that Mississippi law. If that is so, it undoes the viability framework of Roe, and Roe will fall. So what does that mean? It means that some 26 states in the United States have so-called trigger laws. That means that if Roe falls, immediately in those states, abortion becomes illegal. North Dakota, South Dakota, probably Iowa doesn't exactly have one, but it's kind of close. It's quite possible that Wisconsin will pass a 15-week or 6-week law. What it means is that Minnesota, where abortion is relatively safe, it means that our 5 clinics in this state will be inundated from people coming from North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. We will be the only state that provides abortion access in the upper Midwest. It means that people will have to travel further. It means that safety and access will become almost impossible. That's already happening in Texas and in other states. Dang, that is so depressing. I mean, doesn't it just feel like, oh. And we've seen it coming for a while. Well, we are not out of options. Let me say this, the reason why we think that Minnesota is relatively safe is because of a 1994 ruling by the Minnesota Supreme Court called Doe v. Gomez. And in Doe, the Minnesota Supreme Court decided that in this state, people have a right to have an abortion and the right to decide to have an abortion without the government unduly putting its thumb on the scale. I was just in a conversation with lawmakers on Friday, we had Reproductive Freedom Lobby Day. It was an all-virtual event. It was quite wonderful. And one of the members of the Minnesota Reproductive Freedom Caucus, the Reproductive Freedom Caucus in the Minnesota legislature, said, people don't really know what's coming. These bills that have been proposed in other states are being proposed in Minnesota. A 6-week ban, a 15-week ban, more and more. At this moment, because the progressives have the House and the governorship, we don't expect those to get through. This is a really, really important election coming up. And if we lose the Minnesota House, and if we were to lose the governorship, it could be dire. We can take these laws to court, and we are currently doing so. There's currently a court case addressing some of the restrictions. But that takes a really, really long time. And once we lose access, it's much, much harder to get it back. Okay. Man, it's hard. Oh, there is so much that feels so wrong with the world. There is so much. You feel it. I know you feel it. But there are things that we can do. We are not out yet. And we are building something back better than Roe. So what can we do? Well, we can learn to tell our stories if it's safe to do so. If you are a person who has had an experience with abortion, with miscarriage, with infertility, learn to tell your story. You may have to practice it in private in your bathroom first, but learn to put language to what it meant to you, either to have safe, legal access to abortion care or other reproductive health care, or what it meant to you not for it to be safe and legal. We have to learn to tell our stories. These are private stories. I never thought I was going to have to tell my story. It's my business, right? But the other side has taken that privacy and changed it into stigma and shame. And I am here to tell you we are in the no shame game. We're not doing that. So if you can, learn to say the word abortion out loud and learn to tell your story. Let your candidates know that you're pro-choice, if you're pro-choice, but that you support reproductive rights and freedom, that you support reproductive justice. 72% of Minnesotans believe that abortion should be available in our state. It is not a controversial issue. And we want to let our legislators know that they can speak up about it. If your legislators are not members of the Reproductive Freedom Caucus, ask them to join. Ask your legislators to join the Reproductive Freedom Caucus. So we can advocate, we can talk to our people, we can educate, we can check our language, when we know better, we can learn to educate and talk about this. Sometimes I hear older feminists and pro-choice activists say, where are the young people in this movement? Well, they are leading the way. There is lots of online organizing that's happening, and this is not your grandmother's pro-choice movement. And there are ways to offer direct service, whether it's by donation or becoming a clinic escort. There are lots of ways to offer direct service. I am both hopeful and afraid. I am both hopeful and afraid for so many reasons in our society. This is the issue where I choose to plant my flag, and all of my other work, racial justice, climate justice, all of it flows out from this space. And I know that I am not in it alone. I know that together we can continue to talk about it, because people will continue to need health care and need reproductive health care. And we are not going to leave those people alone. We come here and we get our buckets filled to go out and do the work that we are called to do. We come here to grieve what's happening in the world and to be comforted by being in the presence of like-minded folks. We come here to share the joy of seeing each other's faces. I overheard someone say this morning, "It's good to see you in 3D." We come for so many reasons. And we take with us the inspiration, the joy, the shared grief, whatever it is that we receive here out into the world, so that in our own tiny corner of it, we can make a difference. We do make a difference by speaking our truths aloud, by speaking boldly when our voice shakes, by calling other people to do the work of making the world whole. Let's be about this work together.